An aged desolation, she sits by old Shannon's flowing, a mother of many children, of children exiled and dead. In her home, with bent head, homeless, clasping her knees she sits, keening. Sometimes she lifts her head, with blue eyes tearless, and gazes athwart the reek of night upon things long past, upon things to come.
The Banshee is wonderful because she's such a good example of what folklore is all about, because folklore is really something very old and very new at the same time, because it keeps, adapting itself and changing to changing circumstances and so on. And the Banshee and belief in the Banshee illustrates that so well.
Hello there.
Hey guys!
Welcome back to A Pair of Banshees, and this is episode 5.
It took us 5 episodes to do our Banshees, and I think it's 5 episodes in, it's kind of like a nice number to do the Banshee on.
I think so.
Yeah, 5, it's a whole hand. It's a whole 5, it's a good 5 fingers.
A good 5 fingers, and I don't know, I think we kind of just felt like we needed to warm up to her. We had to
I
get
agree.
the ball rolling before we just jumped straight into just talking about the Banshee herself.
Yeah, the Banshee and Death Omens is what we are going to look at today, and it's a sinister episode.
It's a sinister episode, but an interesting episode.
Yeah.
I know people don't like to talk about death.
If anyone at this point is feeling, death not for me, by all means, maybe this isn't the episode for you, but we're just kind of going to... Death and Irish folklore are massively intertwined. So
Yeah.
it is important, I suppose, to enlighten people on this.
We've always had things like death omens and creatures that are bringers of it or forewarners of it.
So that little extract you heard at the beginning was by Barbara Ní Flynn. And Barbara is a UCD folklorist, and she very kindly had a chat with me during the afternoon. And we talked about the Banshee, and we talked about the social importance of her figure and different legends and different myths and her purpose in society and how you recognize her. And it's a lovely interview. She was brilliant to sit down and have a chat. And thank you so much, Barbara. We hope you enjoy it. We'll play that for you a little bit later on in the episode. We're going to talk about the Banshee and Death Omens for just a starter, to warm you up into it.
Yeah, and to give you the lowdown, give you the information, and then we'll allow you to listen to the rest of the interview then. And yeah, so thank you, Barbara. And we both had her as a lecturer when we did folklore in UCD, so which is fantastic.
Wonderful, Barbara, best lecturer in UCD folklore. Woo!
Woo! We love the folklore department in UCD. They're doing fantastic work, and it was we mentioned this in a previous episode, that it was such a privilege as a folklore nerd to see where folklore is stored and preserved, and just seeing other people who actually, spend their life researching and collecting and keeping this stuff and passing it on to others is just it's really lovely. And it's a tiny little folklore department, the archives, but they're so lovely. I remember just listening to the wax cylinders of recordings of storytellers. Yeah. It was just so amazing.
Amazing.
So yeah, shout out to our lovely little folklore archives in UCD. Thank you for your work.
Before we go into our episode, we have to do the mandatory plugging of the social medias.
Of course, because who are we if we don't do that? Right. So yeah, you can find us on all the social medias as always. Please say hi. Come say boo on Instagram, on Facebook, where we have a group that you can join to share stories. We're on YouTube, we're on Twitter, And you can listen to us on basically everything: Spotify, Anchor, iTunes, soon YouTube. I'm in the process of making that happen. Please bear with. Basically, yeah, all the platforms where you can listen to stuff, you can listen to us.
You can also send in any stories that you want to kind of share with us at pairofbanshees@gmail.com, because we want to hear your stories. And if you like, we're quite happy to read them out on the episode and share your stories to a wider community. And we can put your name to it, or we can do it anonymously, or we don't have to do it. But the option is there.
Absolutely. So please share your stories. We've already had one, which we're actually going to share in this episode.
Yeah.
So we're very excited. And we were we were just smiling like noobs when we found out we had our first submission in the email. We were like, yay, people are listening and want to share.
Yeah.
It's so nice. So please do, and we're having lovely responses on the social medias as well, where people are sending in their fairy trees. So don't forget, we're doing the hashtag fairy tree challenge. If you see any fairy trees in your local area or surrounding area, on your 5K walk, of course, please send us in photos, and you can start joining us on this, non-existent as of yet trend, hashtag fairy tree challenge, but perhaps with time it can be a thing.
Yeah. And we are doing it because we want to expose that this practice is still happening, because so many people don't think, oh, folklore, that's an old wives' tale, that's an old thing in the past. No, this is still happening. And here's a little fact for you that I learned, Jenny, was that if a farmer has a piece of land that's covered by woodland or by trees, they don't get paid for that. So to actually keep a fairy tree on your land means you lose money for that land that's been taken up by a tree. So it doesn't work in favor to the farmer to have that tree on his land. But they keep it there because of the tradition of keeping a fairy tree on your land for fear of bad luck if you remove it. So we're trying to tell people this is still happening in today's world. So if you do see them, do send them in to us. We're trying to, representation of fairy trees. That's what it is.
Basically, where representation is very important.
Exactly. Yeah.
And with this whole podcast and everything that we're trying to do, we just want to have a little part in preserving folklore, preserving your stories and experiences. So if we can do that in this kind of way, please allow us and join us in doing so. So yeah, and with that, I guess we'll just jump right into the episode, won't we, Sarah?
We will. I think it's a good place to start.
We're talking about the Banshee, the most famous Irish creature.
Her and the leprechaun, I'd say, are equal in people's knowledge.
Yeah.
What they know about folklore. Yeah, I'd say so.
Or even if it's if you think of any kind of leprechaun, wouldn't be necessarily, I think, an ominous or sinister creature.
No, yeah.
Think of the kind of, any kind of dark folklore or any kind of dark fairy, we'll get into that, but everyone, I think, without knowing anything about folklore, knows the Banshee.
And I think she's had a very hard time. I think how she's represented, particularly a lot in there's a few movies and stuff where the Banshee is depicted as this, you see her.
Evil creature.
Exactly. You see her, she's going to kill you, and she's this wicked hag, this evil creature. And we're here today to kind of say, well, actually, no, she's really not.
Yeah, see, again, the world screwing over female. As, a lot of female creatures, she's feared. She's this terrifying, screaming hag. But we want to kind of delve into the history of her and stories of her and just kind of, discuss and dissect that a little bit, that she's not just this one-dimensional, terrifying old hag.
But first of all, you're probably like, Banshee, yeah, that's grand. I've heard of that. But, what actually is a Banshee,
So what's a Banshee?
So your Banshee is basically, she's a death omen. She is very often depicted as an old woman, very often seen combing her hair, and she's crying. She's crying because somebody who hears her or sees her knows will die. she can also be depicted as a young woman, quite beautiful, but it's more often than not the hag. Very often women are depicted as that kind of. It's either one extreme or the other, isn't it? You're either
Isn't it?
ugly and
Yeah.
decrepit or absolutely stunning. What about what's the representation for ordinary people? Just like you're one of the mill, average person.
Just your regular Joe, yeah. Just your
Yeah.
regular Joshi.
Am I not good enough to be a banshee?
Apparently not, Sarah. I'm sorry.
But at least, I might not be stunning, but at least I'm not a hag.
There's that. I think I'm closer to a screaming hag, really, than anything, really.
Yeah. So the banshee is said to cry for specific families. These families, she's a very old creature, so these families were known as the Gaelic nobility.
Mm-hmm.
She cries for the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the O'Grady's, and then just to break the trend altogether, the Kavanaghs. Yeah, no O's. But she also can follow any family that has the O in front of it or the Mac in front of it.
The Mac, yeah.
I was thinking about afterwards. McKenna.
Yeah. Oh, Lennox. We've got the two. I've got the O, you've got the Mac.
We've both got our own banshees. Woo!
Isn't that mad? I mean, okay, and my surname is Ukrainian. It's Olenek, but as I told Sarah, one time we got a letter to the house and we were on the name, it said O apostrophe Lennox. And I told my mom, I was like, well, that's it. We're officially Irish now. We've got the O apostrophe. We're in.
You're welcome.
So, do you know what? Like, maybe that's how the Banshee sees us as well. She's like, you've been here for 18 years. You're O apostrophe Lennox now.
That's it. That is it. And to have a banshee associated with your family was considered a good thing. People wanted to have a banshee with their
honorable or something.
Honorable. Yeah, because she was this person that cried for you when you were supposed to die. She was warning your family, she was giving you time. And to have one associated with your family, I mean, I suppose as well, it showed your true Gaelicness. So there you go, Jenny. We might have our own personalised banshees.
And we'll share little stories with you towards the end of the episode as well. So maybe.
The origin of the banshee goes right back into very early Irish mythology, but depicted completely differently.
As you'll hear in the interview with Barbara, Barbara talks about this a lot, that the banshee creature sort of morphed from very ancient goddess figures, and she has old roots in traditional Irish lore. So Barbara speaks of this creature as something very, very ancient that sort of morphed with time.
Yes. So the goddess she was called after is Bow. And Bow was a war goddess. And she used to appear in the form of a scald crow and would warn warriors of their death and would call for when they were about to die. A scald crow, I did a bit of research, is the crow.
Not a scaldy crow, yeah.
No, not a scaldy crow. A scald crow is a specific type of crow, Jenny, and it has grey and black feathers. You sometimes see them, so their necks are grey. In the south of Ireland, so in Munster, the banshee was often called a bow.
Okay.
And that's the goddess's name. So there is that tie between them, and then over time she changed her image of. And I think that kind of reflects maybe also how women were treated over time. That once they were revered, so high status and powerful, goddess-like, and then she became the hag. And what does that say about how the value of women changed? I think that says a lot there.
Well, that's how I can't help obviously seeing it as well. As in, she's her station is lowered, her power is lowered, her status, her respect. So she's just she's not a goddess or an ancient, powerful creature. She is a scary old lady you see by the side of the road and you avoid it.
Yeah. But many people will have heard of the fact that she's often known as Banshee, translate to fairy woman. But Patricia Lysett, who very much wrote the book on the Banshee and how it's represented, and we highly encourage you to read her work. She said that it's a problematic translation, because Banshee, she would often be said to mean otherworldly, or
Woman of the Fairy Mound, or an otherworld forewarner of death.
yeah. So the idea was the Banshee is not, maybe potentially not a fairy, because she doesn't share the same qualities as a fairy. Fairies are sociable. You know, you see them in groups, and they have families, and they have order in their societies, whereas a Banshee is solitary. Fairies are mischievous. They can bring good or bad luck to humans. A Banshee is a death omen. She's not playing around when she appears. You know, she's there.
She's here for one purpose, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's not that she's not kind, she's not harmful, she's just this presence.
She is.
She is, yeah. So, and I thought that was really interesting. You know, that she maybe isn't a fairy. Where does she belong then in the world of races?
Well, it's interesting. Maybe she's, I don't know, maybe there's a hierarchy, but maybe she isn't. She's just a different breed, you know? Maybe she's above it all, if she's not a fairy. But I mean, yeah, the kind of idea before we went into research for this episode, I had an idea that she just known as part of the fairy family. But I agree with that. It's sort of problematic and kind of maybe disrespectful to just assume she's just a fairy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
She's its own presence in itself, and especially if she does come from roots of goddess roots, you know?
Yeah.
To then just be like, it's just a little old fairy. It's very disrespectful to any kind of god or goddess to kind of do that.
And then there's that whole argument of some people think the fairy people were the Tuatha De Danann.
Yeah.
And then when we spoke to Pat in episode 2, Pat disagreed with that totally, saying he believes that the fairies and the Tuatha De Danann were two different species of people. And his argument, of course, is that I've seen the fairies, I've talked to them. I was like, yeah, that's fine. That throws everything else out the window. That's a good point, yeah.
I mean, there's that, yeah. When I went to research about ways that, or appearances of the Banshee, in the school's collection, which we talked about in the last episode as well, I found accounts of the Banshee being described as a young woman or a childlike creature with golden hair as well. So, as they said, she has this kind of triad, like the goddess, you know, she appears as a child, sort of somewhere in the middle, kind of beautiful woman, or the extremely old hag, you know? And a lot of these accounts in the school's collection, so children and teenagers asking about the Banshee tradition to, you know, in their local towns or whatever, or their family members, the stories that they collected, I found a lot of accounts saying that she is small because she is like a fairy, or she is a fairy creature, according to people's oral lore. Yeah. That's why she appears, and she's very small in size. She's only a couple feet because she's a fairy creature.
Do you know what's interesting you say about how she appears as a child to like a young woman, to a hag?
Mm-hmm.
It's the fairy tale. Think about it. You know, the innocent child then matures into this beautiful young woman, but the child has a path of either becoming the beautiful young woman or turning into the hag at the end.
Mm-hmm.
That's very much like, you know, how women are depicted in fairy tales. You're either the innocent young child, the beautiful maiden, or the wicked old witch.
Evil wicked old witch, yeah.
Whoa, my mind has just got psyched. What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know, but I think we're onto something there, Jenny.
Maybe, yeah. But like that's how women are usually, you know, there's that kind of, there's the categories. Again, I think the child, the beautiful woman, or the old hag, that's the, you know, it's that kind of the innocent virgin versus the whore versus the wise old crone, you know? Why can't you be anything? Why can't you be all three? Why can't you be anything outside of that? You know? It's that whole thing.
There you go. We need to write something about that.
At something, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Something. We'll come back to that, yeah.
Maybe there's something in her other origin that might give us a little bit of clue into what she really is. So it is said that the Banshee also comes from Keening women. Keening women were women who were brought into funerals. They would dress in dark black clothes. They were often kind of careless with their life, very bohemian, and would walk barefoot a lot of the time. They were women that were brought into funerals to cry over the body of the deceased person, and they would wail and they would sing and they would lament, and it was this cathartic release and purging of emotions. And this was a practice that was had for a very long time, and it only really died out in the 1950s. There are like the final few records of it happening on the
Yeah.
Islands, but like this was something that expanded for eons. This was a really ancient practice, and I think it was a really lovely way that people dealt with death, as we said in the beginning, because it was an acknowledgement of this is an emotional time, and this was a
Need
purge.
to purge myself of this, yeah. And
Yeah,
I think it's beautiful because a lot of other cultures do this. They do it in the Philippines, um, in Mexican culture. You know, it's, as I mentioned to Sarah, my favorite scene in The Lord of the Rings, I think it's Keening, where Eowyn sings that beautiful Old English, I think it's a Keening song, to her brother who dies, when Theodred dies. If Lord of the Rings fans out there, you'll know what I'm talking about. And like it's just this beautiful kind of emotional, guttural, raw female voice. You know, just because we sing for all occasions and we sing because it's too emotional to speak. And you know, funerals and rituals of all sort have always involved song, you know? So I
yeah,
just think it was a really beautiful thing because yeah, death used to be, you know, communal. Um, it brought people together. It just wasn't handled the way it is now, you
no,
know?
no,
So yeah, they trace origins of the Banshee back to this kind of tradition of the traditional Irish keening woman who would sing these emotional, raw mourning songs, I guess, for people.
yeah. And Angela Burke, who is a scholar on it, said that the lament was highly articulate traditions of women's poetry. So these women were called the Ban Queencha, and they were egg queenu, they were crying over the body. It placed women's role in the funeral and in the death process very central. It was a patriarchal society.
Yeah.
They became the primary focus and carers of the body and mourners. Such important processes, and that people followed, and placed women on these statuses to follow them in this occasion where they mightn't. But we found a sample that we can show you of what keening would have sounded like.
So we found these on the website keeningwake.com, and it's an interview with Phillida Anam Oira. This lady was recorded by Maeve Gavin in Edinburgh in 2017, and she talks about hearing keening as a child in Donegal in the 40s. And she says, I just remember every bit of it and I remember what it sounds like. And then she proceeds to demonstrate what she remembers hearing these women do. And we have two little examples of it here. So hopefully you'll be able to hear it now. Okay, and the second extract we have is by the same lady singing it. This is a more kind of melodic version of it.
So, when you hear this, I think what struck me was the the rawness of it and what that would have been like as someone who was grieving a family member, to see these people coming into your house that would have been potentially searched for far and wide, because such was the professionalism that was required to be the role of a keener in the funeral process, and to witness these women very much bearing their souls and
It's beautiful. Yeah.
vocalizing what you were internalizing.
Basically, and we don't do that anymore. We have, we've got beautiful songs, sure, and instruments, but it's not that same that lack of fear about being raw and being emotional, and there's something so beautiful and yeah, like animalistic and pagan almost about it as well, and it's just so beautiful, I think. And we're just, yeah, like as we said, you think of funerals, you think of people kind of fighting to keep tears in and look orderly, and someone very, discreetly dabbing their tears with a handkerchief off their cheek,
Yeah.
There's no, I don't know, there's shame in mourning, there's shame in crying, there's, all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which is a shame. I think we shouldn't be, like, come on, in death especially, that's not a time for decorum and feeling shameful about how you look. And
Yeah.
it should be a time people come together, people openly mourn and be together to help people through it.
Yeah, there is, I think, a very much a perception in today's society of, okay, you take your 3 days to have your funeral process, then maybe you take a week off work, and then you have like, you're a month sad, and then you get over it. When like, and I think that's, that really frustrates me, of like how people in today's world, because time moves so fast. Now, maybe after all this quarantine and lockdown is over, our perception of death and life will be totally different.
I
But
hope so.
before times, we'll call it, people expected you to just move on with your life and to get back to work, when not realizing that death and losing someone and that whole process, it takes so much out of you.
It will change you, it can change your life, it can take you years
Yeah.
to get over something. It can take you years to realize someone has been lost as well. Grief is such a strange, powerful thing that, it affects people in different ways. There's no expiration date on grief. And yeah, like like this is such a common narrative in our society where you say like, oh, it's been 4 years, get over it, like,
Yeah.
or whatever. And it's disgusting.
It is disgusting, and I think people need to. I think that the idea of the keener, it's such a shame that it did die out. And
It's beautiful. I think it's amazing.
do you know why it died out?
Why? The bloody church.
Yeah, guess it was your boy. He was back in business. So I'll
Not
tell you.
Catholicism. Not Catholicism.
So what happened was the keening process. So you had women at the forefront who were acting as, now this is a lovely word I found out, a psychopomp. And a psychopomp, I had never heard of this, but I think it's a beautiful word, is someone who acts as a guide to bring the living person's soul into the other world. So for example, people will probably be familiar with Sharon on the river Styx, bringing you down into Hades world. But the keening process was meant to guide people's souls into this other world. But who else is supposed to do that? The priest, and the prayers around the priest. So what would happen was the priest would come in and bless the body, and then he would have to give way for this woman to come in and perform something that was very pagan and traditional and archaic and not in agreement with the Catholic Church.
And raw, yeah.
Yeah, he would have to be second to a woman and to a pagan ritual, and they did not like that. That was not something they wanted. So what they started to do was to shun the keening ritual, to make people feel embarrassed for having this at your wake. Even the wake itself was considered, because people used to drink and play games and do kind of a big celebration.
Even gather at a person's house, and you would have a get together
essentially. Yeah, but like people
basically, yeah.
They started to shame this, and even in Victorian times, it was told, if for anyone traveling to Ireland, you were told, oh, go and see an Irish funeral if you can, because the women who performed the keening became essentially performing monkeys. You know, it became a novelty and an attraction. It wasn't being taken seriously anymore. It was, oh my God, you still have that? You know, it was embarrassment, and it was shunned out of society, basically.
That's such a shame.
Isn't it? I think
And it's
it's
horrendous. Makes me sad.
because I think the mystery, I think the image of these women and the sounds and everything that would have been a part of it would have been so supernatural feeling. You would have felt these women would have almost been figures of another world. Like they were liminal themselves. They themselves felt that they were balancing two worlds by their cries. And gone.
That's it hurts. It hurts my heart that things like this just disappear.
You can see how the idea of the Banshee being a keening woman is absolutely authentic, you know?
That can, yeah, because now I see, I mean, knowing that, you could just imagine then, especially this woman who cries upon a death, being shunned and pushed out of the norm of society, and that was an integral part of the mourning process, being pushed away, being shunned, becomes this, yeah, like this creature that isn't welcome anymore, that is very related closely to death. Maybe they morphed. There's a bit of reality with kind of myth, and they morph into this creature that we know today as the Banshee.
Yeah, and even the way she dresses like a keening woman, in rags, cloaked, dark clothing. She's an old woman when she is depicted like that, barefoot. I mean, like, if you probably saw these women walking down the street, like, obviously in modern day, you would think, my God, I'm looking at a Banshee. But, like,
Probably.
everything about her, their role, how they looked, their function, it's a Banshee.
I see it.
Yeah. How women have been pushed aside again is just another thing we'd like to wave a flag at.
Basically, can't wait for everybody to get sick of our feminist crap.
But I think it's valid because
it's very valid. And yes, I will make these things sexist if I can.
But women were absolutely pushed aside. They were taken out of the primary focus of the ritual of the funeral. And I think to not acknowledge that, yes, this was a patriarchal thing that was done is, I think you're a bit blind there. We would like to share with you some stories of the Banshee, both personal and both documented.
Yeah, I have some tales that I have found thanks to the school's collection from various counties, so it's pretty great, of the Banshee. So I have two stories here. I was reading a bunch of these collections of tales and oral, yeah, I was going through this oral history anyway, that these children would have collected from people. And some of them didn't have names, unfortunately, but I have some that do. But the more I was reading about these local collections of the Banshee stories, I was coming across some that kept saying that she actually did speak sometimes. Like, it was a very brief bit of speech, but she did actually speak. Because as me and Sarah were talking before we started recording, she's a solitary creature that weeps, but she never speaks.
Yeah, she wails. That's the Banshee. She wails. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is interesting because they are very the accounts that I did find where she did speak, it sounds very fairy tale-y, it sounds sort of made up, I guess, but this is oral history that was passed down in this town then, so it must come from somewhere. And another thing that I kept seeing was the like strength or violence of the Banshee, even though we don't want to portray her as exactly this sinister creature. But I was hearing these tales where, for example, in a story about a Banshee in the collections, There's a story about two men who were returning from a visit when they saw a banshee sitting on the wall combing her hair. She disappeared when they came near her, but she left her comb on the wall. One of the men took her comb, as they bloody do, and they really shouldn't.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, the banshee came to the window and asked the man for her comb. The man handed out the comb on a spade. The banshee, thinking the spade was the man's hand, broke it in two.
Yeah.
And there were a few tales like that where someone throws it out the window. And this is the next story I have from Joe McCann from Coolbach, County Sligo. Again, there was a man, he saw a banshee, she dropped her comb, and he picked it up and went home with it. And the night he had gotten into bed with his wife, and she woke him up saying that she thinks the cat is at the window trying to get in. The man went to the window, and on looking out, he saw that it was the banshee shouting for her comb. So he got it and threw it out to her. "Ha," says the banshee, "'twas all your luck you did not put your hand out." So that's the tale that I found where she actually speaks.
And that's so rare to get that, you know, like, why? I would love to know what her comb looked like, you know, like.
I want to know too. They
What
all keep
colour
finding
was
this bloody comb. It's gold sometimes is the only reference I did find. Apart from that, they just say comb, but I found someone describe it as a gold comb. But yeah, this tale of this kind of reoccurring that, you know, her saying, "Oh, 'twas your luck you didn't put your hand out. Otherwise, otherwise I would have broken it," or something. Or tales like the first one that I read, that her thinking that say the stick that the man passes the comb down to her with, or the spade or something, she breaks it thinking it's the hand. So I guess maybe as punishment for stealing her comb or something.
Good enough for him. Shouldn't be picking up things, leave them where they are. People lost them.
Or yeah, that she runs away and they bloody steal her comb, like. And this is an account I actually found from Mr. John Connery, who's age 60. And this is the tale. He says, "It is said that the banshee takes the shape of a young girl with golden hair, dressed in a shimmering white garment." And this is from a part in Clare, he says. "She's still heard in this part of Clare, and they say that it is the same banshee that comes to the O'Briens always since the days of Brian Boru."
Interesting how she's completely changed there. She's like,
Absolutely, like that's nothing like the creature you'd know.
for anyone out there that is a McCarthy, I don't know if you know, but you have a big banshee in your family. In fact, you have a really important banshee in your family.
Yeah.
You have a former goddess who is a banshee. So the goddess Cliona, she was the goddess of love and beauty. She left Tirnanog she fell in love with a mortal person called Kiavon. And as we all know, an immortal and a mortal kind of romance doesn't always work well together.
It cannot be.
Kiavon went off hunting one day and she sat on the shore down in Cork waiting for him to come back. And she fell asleep while waiting on the shoreline. The king of the Tuatha De Danann wanted to bring her home. So he summoned a wave to take her out into the sea. But when she was brought out in the wave, she was drowned. And in Glandore in Cork, when the tide comes in, the 9th wave is said to be the strongest wave, and that is called Cliona's wave. Which I think is a really nice way of preserving her memory.
Absolutely, yeah.
How she ties into the McCarthy family is, so Cormac McCarthy used to own Blarney Castle. That's where he had his seat. And he was in a lawsuit and he was stressing out about it. And he asked the goddess Cliona, who was known for kind of protecting the lands of Munster, to help guide him in coming out at the best situation from this lawsuit. She came to him in a dream and said to kiss the first stone that he saw on his way to court. He did that the next day. He found the stone. This became our famous Blarney stone. When he went into court, he was able to articulate himself so well that he won the court case, and thus this became the whole gift of the gab thing, always being able to talk yourself out of situations. But she became the Banshee for that family. And I mean, I think it's pretty cool that you've got a goddess as your Banshee. So all you McCartys out there, keep an ear out.
Keep an ear out for sure, yeah. My God. I have a mad one. I have another tale that's collected by a 14-year-old boy. Just because it's mad. A 14-year-old boy, Thomas Ennis, collected it from 79-year-old Pat Cleary from Naas. So, and the tale is this. A young girl called Etty Daly lived in little town Robertstown, County Kildare, and one day she heard a banshee crying near the house, and she went out to see what it was, and she saw a woman peeping around the end of the house combing her hair, which
Oh,
is terrifying. Ugh.
yeah.
The girl was only 8 years of age, and she didn't know it was the banshee, so she had a stick in her hand to hit the woman, and because she thought she was coming to steal something, she ran after the woman and was shouting at her to go away. Very brave 8-year-old, if you ask me.
Yeah.
She followed her up to the tunnel at Nellie Connolly's gate at Grange Clare, and the banshee went under the tunnel. The girl went around all sides of the bridge and couldn't see her anymore. She began to get afraid then, apparently only then, and ran home and told her mam, and her mother said it was the banshee. Etty Daly was burned to death soon after.
Who's Etty? The
The
child.
8-year-old child.
Oh my God. What?
What is this tale?
What I think. Oh, that's really creepy.
That's horrendous. I don't like that. I
Oh,
thought it was mad because it's so creepy, like this idea of a woman peeping around the house combing her hair, but then this 8-year-old is so fearless and tries to chase away this intruder, or so she thought,
yeah.
and was burnt to death soon
What a
after.
horrific way to get your revenge on a child, like.
Just this child, yeah.
What I think is really interesting about that story too is how physical the banshee is. She
Mm,
like the child is chasing the banshee for like obviously a period of time.
a
She
while,
obviously
yeah.
has, like a physical form. She has arms and legs and thick, she's skin and bones. She's not wispy. She's
Yeah.
obviously. Well, I have this horrible image in my head, Jenny, of like this woman in black, like half like leaping.
I
You know?
see what you mean. Oh, that's horrendous.
Oh, Christ.
Like this kind of spider creature or
Yes,
something
Spider
like.
Woman leaping. Oh,
Oh, no, no, thank you. Well, I shan't be sleeping tonight,
how we did record. We did decide to record late, didn't we?
as always.
As always. But myself and Jenny both have two personal stories that we'd love to share with you about the Banshee. Um, so it's our story time now.
Our story time. Mine is very brief, but
But yours is like
it's
the other week. Do you know what I
it
mean?
was the other week, and the fact that right before we started recording was when I realized that
Yeah.
this could have been a bloody banshee experience.
Potentially. I mean,
I
like,
was-
who's to say it wasn't.
Yeah. I was telling Sarah, and this. So, a few weeks ago, I heard a noise at 3 in the morning. And I remember telling Sarah this because, we were doing this this podcast, we're talking about creepy things that happen. So I remember telling Sarah this, that, I'm usually up quite late anyway. And I think it was after 3 in the morning. So everyone's asleep, and I hear this horrendous noise, like not in front of my house on the street, a bit further down in the street. I live in a cul-de-sac, and there's just a row of houses obviously leading down to the main street. So it was further down in my main street, but I could hear it out of my window, and it sounded like this. It was a horrendous, like, crying of a child. And as I explained to Sarah, like, I've heard foxes, I've heard animals, or when you listen to something and it's an animal, it might be creepy, it might scare you, but it's an animal,
It's natural sounding.
It sounds natural. This was very clear child screaming, crying. It was a child scream. I got worried that, when you first hear noises, I always kind of peep out because I don't know, I hope nobody's in trouble, and where I live isn't really a bad kind of area generally, really, but there's nobody on the street, or I look out and there's noises, or when I hear a woman screaming at night, I always look out to make sure that she's okay. It wasn't a woman screaming, it wasn't a dangerous scream, it was a child crying, screaming. Look out, there's nothing there, and it made me feel unwell. It really freaked me out, and I just know it wasn't a fox or anything like that. And it was went on for a minute or so, and then it just stopped and disappeared, and I tried to distract myself and go to sleep. And then, as I was telling Sarah the story, because I would have forgotten about that then. I just kind of thought nothing of it then. I forgot about it. And Sarah said, well, has anybody that you know died? And I thought about it then, not that it's close, but 2 weeks ago then, the lady who, my parents own an allotment where we do all our gardening and growing of our vegetables and fruit and stuff. Last week I was working at the allotment with my mom, and when we arrived, the owner of the land was there clearing out the allotment space, because there's greenhouses on each one, and he was clearing out the greenhouse right opposite our one. And because it's, an allotment, and it's mostly elderly people or parents planting. So, my mom knows everybody, you say hi to everybody. And it's a little Asian lady who owns a lot of chickens that owns that allotment. And her chickens were gone. And we're kind of wondering where they're gone. And the owner of the land comes out of the greenhouse, and he's like, oh, how are you doing? We say hi. And my mom says, what's going on? Where's the chickens? And he says, oh, she died. She died, and her husband doesn't want to keep the allotment, and he told me to clear it out. And that was very sad, and I only kind of connected the dots there that might have been, but it was the noise though that freaked me out. Doesn't sound human and doesn't sound like an animal, and it was gross. So that's possibly my encounter with something.
That's really disturbing. It's just disturbing the fact that it's the coincidence of you hearing the sound, because I remember you telling me it.
Yeah.
Because you were really trying to stress to me how horrible it made you feel and how horrific it sounded. And it's just a coincidence that somebody did die. And somebody was like you knew. You like, ugh. I think.
Yeah, not close, but and maybe like you always say, it's like, if you see a death omen, it could be someone in your family or someone you know or someone close to you. But this is the lady that owns the allotment right next to ours.
Oh yeah,
so it's like physically close. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be someone in your family. I think it can just be someone that I think, like, I don't know. So the story in my family is, it's not on the Mac side, it's on the Dunn side. And okay, so I'll set the scene. So where this takes place is down rural road outside of Cavan Town. We're talking forests and bogland and tiny little cottages, really what you would imagine like of the stereotypical Irish image. And it feels like you're going back in time when you go there. It's a weird feeling, but that's where my granddad would have had lived, and where I would have been gone as a child for a while. And there was a story that there was a banshee that used to be heard in this area. So there's two stories. The first story is, one night he came home and he came in and he asked my granny, he asked her, he said, there's a screaming noise up in the forest. Why is that there? I can hear it the whole way from walking home, because it would have been like a few miles walk out of Cavan Town to get there. And she turned to him
casual.
And said,
it's a screaming noise, as you do.
He said, who's up in the woods crying? And she went, I've been hearing that all night. And the next day it turned out one of the neighbours had died.
Wow.
And then another night, someone was found passed out on the side of the road. So they got her and they brought her into one of the cottages, and they woke her up. The whole neighbours came in, it was a big thing. And this isn't that long ago. This is only during maybe the 80s. Maybe the 70s, 80s. And they woke her up and they're like, what happened to you? Are you all right? How are you feeling? And she said that a little woman had walked out from behind a well, like a pump well that you would get water from. And she came out, she was dressed in white, and she was combing her hair. And she was crying. And she passed out from the fear of it, from seeing her.
God.
And it turns out then someone in one of the cottages then died. But I remember going to that pump as a child. I remember myself and my brother, we would have been really small, like maybe 7, 8. And we walked up to the pump, like it was just an old water pump, you know? And we like walked around it and concluded, yeah, there is no way you could hide behind that pump without being seen. Like,
Yeah,
this is weird. And we ran because it was terrifying that we like had like decided that.
absolutely.
But I often wonder now today, do they still hear her? Do they still hear her cry?
Hmm.
Because that wasn't that long ago, and I mean, it's not like she's. I don't know. It was a really strange area. It felt like you were going back in time. Jenny, I still have that horrible image of the spider banshee in there.
Me too. Me too. I don't need to unsee that. I mean, I need to unsee that. And now with the kind of old withered lady coming out from behind a well, like, mm-mm.
Spider banshee behind the well.
Oh,
Oh,
Jesus. Jesus.
so
I'm
creepy.
sorry if you're listening to this at night when you are listening and you won't be able to sleep like us now.
I hope.
But class, that this is this is the nature of such podcasts.
But let's try coming from a skeptical point of view, right? Let's try settle our nerves. Um, we decided to have a look into some animal sounds that would be heard in the Irish, both urban and rural environments.
Yeah.
They're both the same. And kind of pose the question to you: do you think this is what people were hearing and then saying, "I heard a banshee"? Now, keeping in mind that people would be very familiar with what the animals in their environment does sound like. They would grow up very close to nature, both in urban and rural environments.
I have a barn owl screaming, and then I have a fox screaming for you to listen to. And do you know, like you're like, oh right, yeah, let's look at this from a skeptical point of view. Is this just what they were hearing? But like, let me play for you the barn owl screaming. I don't think there's anything nice about this. I think it's pretty terrifying. That's pretty terrifying. And if I heard that in the middle of the bloody night, my brain would instantly go to, that's a bloody banshee.
And you know what else? Barn owls, they're huge, they're massive when their wings are spread out and they're glowing white. Imagine seeing that in the moonlight. You know, say there's a barn owl sitting
And
maybe.
their eyes would glow in light.
Yes. I wonder actually maybe some banshee sightings could have been a barn owl.
I found one case in the school's collection that apparently a barn owl got tangled in some kind of cloth or sheet, and that's what somebody saw when they chased it, because I don't know what will possess you to chase the bloody banshee
People
for
seem to
some
do a lot.
godforsaken bloody reason.
The
Like,
spider banshee is back in my head, Jen.
well, this person was like, yeah, grand, there's a flying banshee. Let me go investigate that.
People were very brave back then.
Excuse me, sir?
Yeah.
What? So it was literally apparently a barn owl tangled into some kind of cloth with its eyes glowing in the dark, flying around, flopping around. Oh, Jesus.
Imagine how stupid you'd feel the next day when you came down and was like, ah, lads, it was a bit of an owl.
But like, I would have had to throw out my pair of trousers if that's what I saw in the night, Sarah.
I
And you're
know.
telling me some bloody man went after this happily to investigate. I would be deceased.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
Lord, no. But anyway, I mean, it's pretty scary though. It's an intense screech. It's a very like sharp
Shrill.
screech. It's horrible, yeah. And so the next recording we have is a fox screaming. So make of this what you will as well. I think it's something. So this is a fox.
I mean, like, a fox is a dog, and you just never would think a fox would make that sound.
No, it sounds kind of like, I don't know. It does sound sort of like a dog, and somewhere between a dog, a person,
Yeah.
and a bird.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can imagine that, you know, 50 years ago and more, you hear that in the middle of the night, and, there's a death is even more common and unexplained and feared, and you hear things like that in the middle of the night, Of course, your imagination and your mind would want to put a reason or an excuse, or yeah, like a reason for hearing such a thing.
I think
As
so.
you said, we always try rationalize something that seems irrational.
I'm glad we've kind of made it from like, yeah, we've done that skeptical thing. Though the spider, I'm trying to get rid of the spider banshee in my head. Like,
I will never. I don't think that's a thing that goes away, Sarah.
I wish I'm so glad you can see it too, because I wish I could like take a picture of what it looks like in my head. I don't even want to draw it. Like, it's horrific.
No, don't, because I see clearly. As you said, it's like running along, like galloping.
Yeah.
And then I just thought of like kind of spider jumps, like. Well, I mean, yeah. So there's things like that, like throughout history, where maybe that is what people are hearing, and we just assumed it was the banshee or it was something else,
Make of it what you will, as Jenny says. It could be. It could be just an animal sound, or it could be something greater. The fact is, the banshee happened. There's records of her in every county in Ireland, and what I suppose what I really enjoy about her is that I think most people have a banshee story in their family, and I think even to this day, she's still heard. And I think people do kind of maybe have maybe a fear of her, of hearing her and what that would mean, because again, this death omen, whether you believe it or not, I think people don't like the idea of encountering bad luck.
Of course, I mean, we still think of the superstitions that we still hold basically like fact or like truth, People still don't walk under ladders. They say don't open your umbrellas, which comes from the Victorians, and we still do it. The whole knocking on wood 3 times, the breaking of mirrors, the biggest travesty, that's all still so believed.
Yeah, and but like even in the most simplest ways, some people might say, "Oh, I don't believe in bad luck, blah blah blah," but they have certain ritual things that maybe guarantees them good luck. So, say for instance, some people before they go on a plane will always have a pint in the airport because they're like, "I'll have a pint in the airport, and that's the start of my good holiday." And
Right.
maybe if they didn't have that pint, they might feel a little bit off and uncomfortable getting on the plane, being like, "Oh, I should have had that." It puts a weird chain of events in motion because you don't feel you've started it right.
Yeah.
That's the same thing, I think, of stopping bad luck, or feeling that you have bad luck because you didn't have your pint. I think people do ritualistic things without even realizing it to guarantee them good things. Whether it's wearing your your favorite pair of clothes when you go to the gym because you're like, yeah, I'm gonna have a good workout.
No, absolutely. I think it's true. Like, we don't consider, you think like ritual things have to be grand gestures or something, but we all have things like that. There's, or we'd call them our quirks or something, but we all have something, you have to make your bed this type of way. You have to close the door this type of way. I don't know, tie your hair this type of way because X, Y, and Z. Do you know what I mean? Everybody has these things. Especially when it comes to just, I think, I think everybody in some sense believes in good or bad luck or jinxing something,
We're going into more the general death omens now. So our Banshee is our main entity, but there are a lot of other, not superstitions, there are a lot of kind of omens, basically.
And their superstitions, like the whole, seeing magpies or...
What is the magpie thing exactly? I know everyone has 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy.
It's 1 for sorrow, 2 for mirth, 3 for a funeral, and 4 for birth. So the magpie rhyme, I think everybody knows the nursery rhyme. It's apparently first recorded in 1780 by John Brand. And that's the lyric: 1 for sorrow, 2 for mirth, 3 for a funeral, and 4 for birth. And it was then expanded by Michael Aislabie Denham. I don't know, maybe I screwed that up. And he added 1 for sorrow, 2 for mirth, 3 for a funeral, 4 for birth. 5 for heaven, 6 for hell, 7 for the devil, his own self. He added that on, and it sort of expanded after that as well. And Victorians were just so fearful of them, I think, with that in the early, or like mid 1800s, when this kind of rhyme came out. Victorians were so fearful of magpies that they nearly hunted them to extinction. From before then, before Christianity, Romans believed that magpies were highly intelligent and excellent, and had excellent reasoning abilities. And in ancient Greece, they were sacred to Bacchus, so the god of wine. Even Native American tribes believed that wearing a magpie feather was a sign of fearlessness. So before the Victorian times, it was actually this like very strong kind of creature. The church then comes along and insists that, which is mad, that the magpie was the only bird not to weep or comfort Jesus during his crucifixion.
Oh.
That the magpie then didn't go into a proper period of mourning for him, and a number of superstitions sort of grew from that in the Bible. A 19th century vicar reported one of his servants explaining that the magpie was the only bird not to enter Noah's Ark, that it preferred to just sit outside and swear in the pouring rain. And a rumor was started by the church then that, this is mad, the magpie carries a drop of the devil's blood on their tongues, and if you cut the tongue out to release the blood, the magpie would then be able to speak in human speech.
What was their issue with magpies? What did it do to them?
Right? And this is the like horrendous fear and superstition of things like the magpies comes from this, because they carry a drop of the devil's blood in their tongues.
It's a bit
Who
much.
says that?
I bet you, because you know the way magpies are known to like steal shiny things. I bet you like some fella got his lovely ring nicked and was just like, that's it, hate them forever.
Magpies in medieval times, they would be scavengers in battlegrounds, hospitals, the gallows. So, you know, from medieval times, when Christianity starts taking root, like you have that idea, them kind of like what are the birds that eat flesh?
Crows. Oh, vultures.
Vultures. They're that idea, that kind of, especially on like gallows and battlegrounds, you think of magpies like vulture creatures, you know.
Yeah.
And during breeding season, apparently magpies supplement their diet of berries with eggs and chicks of other birds. So gamekeepers and country folk who kept birds would obviously hate the magpie as well. And of course then, yeah, they're known as this thieving bird. So they're already, add to the scavenging, add to eating other birds' eggs. They're this horrible little evil little creature.
Do you salute a magpie?
You do. That is how you, if you see a single magpie, you're supposed to salute it. You're supposed to say, "Good morning, General," or "Good morning, Captain." This is a way to counteract the bad luck. Or you kind of tip your hat to it. You spit 3 times over your shoulder. You say, "Good morning, Mr. Magpie. How are Mrs. Magpie and all the other little magpies?"
Could you imagine all the Victorians going around, you know, just...
"Hello, Mr. Magpie, how you doing?" Yes, because apparently this comes from the whole seeing one is a bad omen, because magpies mate for life. So seeing a single magpie means kind of they lost their mate, or they're kind of, I don't know, faulty and they didn't find their mate. So maybe that's like why that is. They mate for life, they have the mate, so they shouldn't be seen almost by themselves.
It's a fear of like, maybe you'll never find a partner, or maybe something bad will happen to your partner.
Maybe.
That's interesting. Right.
And that's why you say things like, "Good morning, Mr. Magpie. How is your lady wife today?" To kind of, I guess,
Again,
imagine or throw back that, oh yes, there is a lady magpie.
Yeah.
You know, apparently I read one as well as to blink rapidly to fool yourself into thinking you've seen 2 magpies. Which is ridiculous.
Things people did.
Like, it's mad. Including this on this website as well then, after that, saying you should flap your arms like wings and call loudly to mimic the magpie's missing mate.
Jesus, did people actually do
You know, I want to know. I wish. Like,
I can get the tipping your hat, like that's subtle, you know, that
it's like a respect thing. It's like, yeah,
do that discreetly, even like, you know, how you general, you know, how good morning, you know,
exactly. Like, you can get away with that.
yeah, you could get away with that, but like
It's like flag your arms. Go, go.
in the middle of O'Connell Street, like, could you imagine?
Yeah. Sure. What else would you be doing?
I know, yeah, that's it.
Just imagine that the bloody the whole the church saying that
That's such
it
a
has
pure.
the devil's blood. Like what is that?
Who hurt you?
A magpie apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Wow.
It's mad, isn't it?
What other death omens did you find?
I found when you think of death omens as well, a lot of talk about like doppelgangers.
Yes.
That, did you see this? Which is mad.
No, did you hear
it's
about what it's called in Irish?
No.
Right, listen to this.
Oh.
And it's called a fleek.
A fleek.
A fleek. Because I've heard about the doppelganger thing too.
Right.
But in the Irish doppelganger, and we must look into this more, Jenny, but it's called a fleek. I think it's a fleek. Jesus, I hope it's not a fleck. Hold on.
Well, that changes eyebrows on fleek a bit, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? No, it doesn't, Jenny. Your eyebrows are matching.
Look at the eyebrows on fleek.
They're each other's doppelgangers because they're identical.
Stop. This is what happens when you record an episode at 3 a.m.
What have we just done? Have we unlocked some secret code?
I think
Is the
so.
Illuminati going to come now?
Oh, apparently. Beware. That'll be our 3 knocks on the bloody door.
Stop. I have the spider Banshee back.
Stop. I'd rather the Illuminati. But this whole thing with doppelgangers, in case somebody doesn't know, a doppelganger is like a copy of you, a lookalike. So this idea about death omens, I mean, all sorts of kind of things. Like there's the Banshee that's very obvious, but there's nothing else quite like her that I could find. So in other cultures, it seems, yeah, like seeing a vision or a shadow version of yourself is an omen that you will die. So this kind of idea of running into your doppelganger, it's a sign that you will die if you see this image of yourself. And apparently it's a sign that you will die in England. And Percy Shelley,
Yep.
so apparently saw his own double, who, you know, who was the famous poet, famous romantic poet, husband of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. He told her about seeing many visions, including seeing his own double. And this double apparently was also seen by a guest in the Shelley household. And shortly after seeing it, he died. He drowned.
But do you know what happened with his doppelganger? He saw his doppelganger on the shore pointing out to sea.
Oh my goodness. And he drowned on that ship.
Yes. Now, that scares me so much.
I see such a clear image. Like, imagine just this, like, ghostly version of yourself with this blank stare just pointing your finger. No.
If you have a twin, it doesn't count. We should point that out. That's
no,
fine.
Twins are exempt. Twins are a thing, but a doppelganger when you're definitely not a twin is slightly concerning.
Ugh.
Yeah.
The idea is something is there's another spirit trying to take your form, and two of you can't exist in the same world at the same time.
Oof.
Oh, that's real sinister and dark. Oh, don't like that.
It is, yeah. I mean, yeah. In New Zealand they have a similar idea as well, but it's a very bad sign to see a figure of a still living friend, obviously, because then you'd say, but they're still alive, but that's not really them. Because it's a sign that they would die. If their face isn't visible, it means that they will die soon, and if their face is clearly visible, they're already dead.
Oh dear. Oh God.
So I guess that's kind of like seeing a ghost, though.
Yeah.
Which is mad. But yeah, I just found in England and Germany, they have a lot of women in white cases. You know, you see a floating woman. Cases, I think she's usually associated with kind of suicide or infant death, things like that. Maybe she's a bit vengeful or something, not exactly a banshee type, but a sort of a ghost, I guess. If you see a flame in the floor in front of you, it's a sign that a sick person in your household may soon die. If you hear a watch ticking sound in the wall or in a piece of furniture, it's a sign that someone in the family will die.
Yeah.
If you see this black spectral dog again, or in Irish lore, it's a shuck, which Mark talked about in the last episode as well. This kind of large dog, large black dog, the size of a calf apparently, with glowing eyes, and they howl, and they're supposed to. The closer to you they get, the quieter they get.
Oh, that doesn't help anyone.
No, that just sounds awful, doesn't it?
Mm.
But you have some kind of household believed kind of ones as well.
Yeah.
And I said there's the ticking, but the clocks.
Yeah, it's well known. I always thought these things were well known. Clocks.
Apparently, only people like us know these things.
Yeah. Well, let's get educating. Apparently, clocks will stop around when somebody has died, and we definitely have encountered that a few times when maybe a relative, and not even someone in the house. I remember we had a relative who died in Dublin, and I think two different clocks had stopped in the house, and one of those clocks was a watch that had gotten a new battery. And they had stopped pretty much in and around the time of when they had died. Another thing is if a painting or a picture falls off the wall, and it doesn't have to be a picture of the person, or it doesn't mean that the people in the picture are going to die, but apparently it's a thing. And again, that was something in my own house that we had a picture fall off the wall. 2 weeks
That's
later,
right.
relative went into hospital, and that was it. That was kind of the end for them. And then to bring in our three knocks, this is something. This is a really big death omen. It's something that I only thought about with my mum quite recently, that we actually did have in the family, and I never drew the connection before. But when I said it out loud and having the awareness of the three knocks now, I was like, Jesus,
that's what it was.
That's what it was. So the three knocks are supposed to be that if somebody, it's a death omen, that you hear three knocks unexplained, and it's supposed to tell you that someone is going to die. And the weird thing is, of Halloween of October 2017, my nana was in her room, and she was in bed, and she would have the radio on very loud because she just enjoyed listening to it at full blast. And she heard on the window outside at the house, and her room is near the front door. So if someone was like couldn't get into the front door, they'd knock on her window. So she got up. She heard the sound over the radio, and she got up and she checked the front door, thinking someone's after been locked out. What happened? There was no one at the front door. And she went around the house and checked on, I think it was my sister who was still in the house, and she went in to her and she was like, "Were you outside?" But it was very clear that she hadn't gotten up in the past while. She was watching a film. She was like, "No, I haven't been." And there was no one else in the house. And I remember when Nana told us about that, she was very nervous. She was very shaken. Yeah. She did not like the fact that she had heard three knocks on the window. She was quite nervous at that. But we all brushed it off, you know. Not even, I never even thought of it at the time of being a death omen. In my family particularly, there is one of, it's someone comes back to visit you before you die in my family. So, and I think that's quite nice. I take a lot of comfort in that. But it happened again with my nana in January of 2018. And what's weird is after those three knocks, I started to pick up on something not being right. Even though the house was running as normal, nothing was out of place. Nana was fine. Everything was grand. Yeah. But I was picking up on something wrong. And I couldn't explain it to you, Jenny. I just knew something was wrong. And then in January 2018, she was in the sitting room. She had gotten up during the night and had fallen asleep in the sitting room. And I went in to see, "Oh, you're here. You know, what do you want for breakfast?" And she told me that her husband had came and visited her during the night. And I said, "Oh, like, you dreamt about him?" She was like, "No, Sarah. He was in the room. He was with me. He was standing right beside me. And I didn't want to open my eyes, but I could feel him there. I was like, were you asleep? And she was like, no, I was awake. And I was just holding on to his feeling. And I think he was there to tell me to tell me everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I felt such a sinking feeling because I knew what was coming then. And that to me was my death omen. I never got the 3 knocks, but the figure I knew was a sign.
Yeah.
And then in May, she did pass. But I took, funny enough, the death omen that we had, I actually took comfort in it. I wasn't afraid of it. I never spoke about it until I think after she died, because I didn't want to admit that it happened, because if you admit it, it's real, it's happening, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But if I could, when I did think about it, it wasn't a bad thing. If anything, it kind of helped me get through it, knowing.
It is something comforting, as I said, like to know your grandfather comes back for your grandmother,
Yeah,
to usher her off to wherever, like that's a really lovely
yeah, like
thing.
the psycho pump.
Yeah, to help her find her way so that it's less traumatic or whatever, which
Yeah,
is it's nice. And it's not just a spirit, it's not any kind of creature or anything. It's someone someone
yeah.
she loved, it's there's something really beautiful and comforting about it, so I get that.
And I think that's maybe perhaps a way we should start to look at death omens is, I think it's natural to be fearful of them, but to accept that they're not there to tell you someone is going to die because of them. Someone is already dying, and they're
Yeah.
here to say, look, we're here, we're gonna mind them.
Yeah, there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, I think that's nice.
Yeah.
On the subject of the 3 knocks, we had a listener story. So we had someone write into us. We were absolutely delighted. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
For writing into us, and they wanted to share their story of having the 3 knocks in their family.
This is the email I'm just going to read out, and we want to share this reader's story and the fact that they actually want to share it. This reader says, my mum used to live in the flats in town when she was growing up. They lived on the top floor at the very end, furthest from the stairs. I have visited this flat and remember the track to get up all the stairs. One day there was a knock at the door on the letterbox. My nan went to answer, there was no one there. She went back to what she was doing, and then the knock came again. She again opened the door and no one was there. She assumed it was children playing and decided to wait in the hallway in case they knocked again. They had a frosted glass door, and she thought once she saw a shadow, she could open the door and catch the children in the act. So my mum was 7 at the time and remembers standing in the hallway with my nan, waiting for the next knock. As they were standing there, the knock came. My mum says she clearly remembers there was no shadow. My nan quickly opened the door and ran out and down the hallway and down the first flight of stairs, where she bumped into a neighbour, George, who was coming up. She asked if he had seen children running by, and he said no. A week later, my mum's dad died suddenly. In the family, we always refer to this as the 3 knocks before death, but apparently they are referred to as forerunners. As I said, I thought this was just family story. So in 2014, my uncle was in a hospice. This was my dad's brother, so a relation to my mum through marriage. My mum and dad were sitting in the conservatory part of our house. My sister and I were watching TV in the front room as I remember it. My mum said a knock came while they were sitting in the conservatory. She described it as a strange knock that, quote, vibrated through the walls, end quote. She thought one of us, I have one sister, must have gone out and forgotten a key and was knocking loudly to be let in. She assumed one of us in the sitting room would open the door, but started to get up when another knock came. She turned to my dad and said in passing, but with some seriousness, what if it's the 3 knocks, when the knock came again? I remember my mum and dad bursting into the sitting room asking my sister and I had we been knocking on the walls. We said no, we hadn't been, and they asked had we heard knocking on the walls. Sometimes you hear neighbours moving around. We said no, it had been very quiet. It had been a very quiet night until they had come in a fluster. My parents looked so shaken, particularly my dad, as he says he's a skeptic and would scoff when my mum would tell these stories. 2 days later, my uncle passed away.
Wow.
So that's the tale that we had sent in to us.
And we have full permission to share it, and we're keeping it anonymous as requested. So, but we wanted to tell you about it.
Because it's such a story. I mean, wow.
Yeah, that somebody, it kind of, when you hear somebody else has it in their family, it makes it real. Why would my family and her family, we've never met, have the same thing?
I know. But I mean, not just you as well, but it's
bigger than us, yeah.
It's bigger than us, yeah. And it's just something really nice about having, obviously, personal tales from people listening sent in as well. It's not just us babbling on.
Yeah, I think when people can share the same experience but at different locations, times, for different reasons, I think it cements it that this is a real thing that happens.
I think so too. I mean, we've talked about this. I think there's some, not authenticity, but some legitimacy to it. It's a very good story, so thank you so much for sharing that with us and allowing us to read it out. I mean, we've kind of come to an end, I think, of everything that we were going to share with you before we allow you to listen to the rest of the interview with Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
We hope we have educated you and interested you in the folklore that we did share, and we hope maybe we've lessened your judgment or fear of the Banshee a little bit, even.
Except Spider Banshee.
Spider Banshee will always be the truth.
No! What's that thing like? You better listen to this whole podcast, otherwise Spider Banshee will be in your bed tonight. Oh no!
I felt it, Sarah. Why?
Sorry, I take it back.
Now our listeners are gonna leave because we're terrifying. But no, we hope Spider Banshee doesn't get you.
Oh.
I mean, I will never unsee that image and her coming out from behind a well. So I'll take that to my grave.
Appropriate,
yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to us. And I know this has been a long episode as well, but we just had so much to share with you.
Yeah, and I mean, I enjoyed it.
I had fun. I always have fun with you, Sarah.
I have fun with you too, Jenny. And like, I think, yeah, as Jenny said, exactly. We hope we've educated you on it, lessened your fear around the idea of a death omen and what it would sound like or appear to you like. And please enjoy the interview with Barbara. She's a wonderful woman. Again, thank you so much, Barbara, for taking your time out to chat with us. Hopefully her interview enlightens you a little bit more into a more academic perspective of the Banshee than just us two having a waffle.
A ghost waffle, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you to the Irish Folklore Archives in UCD again for the work that they do and for preserving amazing history and folklore. We will leave you here with the rest of Barbara's interview, and thank you so much for listening.
The Banshee is probably one of the most well-known creatures in folklore. So her status is only second to the leprechaun in terms of how well-known she is in folklore.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I suppose she's associated with the ultimate mystery of death, for a start, and I suppose that, it's something that has a huge emotional impact on everybody, and it does represent a belief in the existence of another world, a supernatural world, and maybe that's something that people find a little bit consoling around the time of death as well. But no, what you say is quite right. I mean, the Banshee and the leprechaun are still very much going strong in popular culture, and I'm always interested myself because we get quite a lot of American and other international students studying folklore in UCD, and I would often ask them in one of the early classes if they'd ever heard of the Banshee and so on. And every year, a large proportion of the American students in particular would put their hands up and they'd say that they, that they did know what the Banshee was and that they had heard stories about it. So yeah, I mean, the upshot of it is that the Banshee certainly seems to have made it into the 21st century.
Yeah.
She's still very much alive and thriving.
Which is great that she's trying to transcending time.
Yes, absolutely. The Banshee has all kinds of other unexpected qualities attaching to her as well. I mean, for a start, traditions about the Banshee and stories about the Banshee are something which you find very, very much in urban contexts. as well as in rural areas. So lots of towns and city villages throughout the country would have their own Banshee stories. And that would certainly be true of Dublin as well. I may have mentioned to you before that there was actually quite a strong Banshee tradition in the Sean McDermott Street area, which of course is just off O'Connell Street, right bang in the middle of Dublin city centre. And I just discovered recently, only a couple of years ago, that there was also a tradition about the Banshee appearing in Clontarf, which is a suburb of Dublin, of course. And it's actually where I'm from myself originally. But again, places like Clontarf are not the types of places that people immediately think of when the word Banshee is mentioned. So it's this lovely, unpredictable quality that you have about the Banshee and traditions about it, which I really like as well.
Yeah, in fact, existing in an urban environment.
Exactly, yeah.
That's
very much so, very much so. I suppose it makes sense in many ways because the Banshee is, obviously she's a figure very strongly associated with death. Death is something that you find in all parts of the country and in all walks of life. I suppose we shouldn't. But no, you don't. She has very much proved to be very much almost a universal feature of Irish tradition.
And has she always been associated with death, or were her origins different?
Well, I'll tell you what, again, as I know I've mentioned to you before, the expert on Banshee is a woman called Patricia Leist, who was Professor of Irish Folklore at UCD for years, and she was a colleague of mine at UCD for many years. And Patricia Leist had carried out a really detailed and very, very comprehensive study of the Banshee. It was published originally in the 1980s, but it still stands as a good piece of work, and it really is the essential reference book for anybody who's interested in the subject. But she, in her book, did trace the origins of the Banshee right back to medieval Irish literature, and there were a number of goddess-type figures like the Morrigan and Evil and various other goddess figures like that, who do seem to be very early versions of Banshee, shall we say, in that they were also associated with death, and they were also believed to announce death and to be heard crying to warn people that somebody was going to die. So yeah, certainly the Banshee, while it's something, belief in the Banshee is something that is still very much alive and active in the present day, it's also something that does appear to be very, very ancient in Irish culture and Irish tradition as well, going right back to about the 8th century, as I said, in the case of some of the texts. And what appears to have happened is that the Banshee kind of morphed or developed from ideas that were associated with these early goddess figures, and then became the Banshee that we know in modern popular tradition and that we still have today, obviously.
Wow, so the image of her being the old woman is not her true form.
Well, no, not exactly. I mean, again, obviously, the figure that the Banshee, the figure of the Banshee in modern folk tradition is not the same, not identical to the figure of these goddesses that I was talking about in early Irish literature. And certainly, no, the goddesses in early Irish literature appear to have been much kind of, they were goddesses of the land, that sovereignty is what appears to have been their function. And there is no particular suggestion in the case of most of them that they were kind of, very old figures in the way that the Banshee is said to be. But having said that, I suppose the idea of a goddess of sovereignty is something that could also be seen as very ancient, and something that has ancient roots. So maybe the idea of the Banshee appearing as an old woman is just a manifestation of her very deep roots and her very long pedigree in Irish tradition. But it is interesting too, because the figure, or these figures rather, because there were several of them, these kind of sovereignty goddess figures, and they were often associated with particular families, particular dynasties, and that would also seem to be echoed in modern day traditions about Banshee, where we have the belief that the Banshee is associated with particular families, and especially, as I'm sure you know, families whose names have Mac or O in their name. And, this would appear to be probably an echo of this earlier tradition of the goddesses of the land being associated with particular families as well. But anyway, it's just, the Banshee is wonderful because she's such a good example of what folklore is all about, because folklore is really something that's very old and very new at the same time, because it keeps, adapting itself and changing to changing circumstances and so on. And Banshee and belief in the Banshee illustrates that so well.
Well, I'd like to talk about that, the surnames with the O or Mac in front of it. Would it not be true that a lot of Irish surnames had O in their name and it was lost over time? Does she still scream for those families, or how does that work?
Absolutely. No, she does. And indeed, it should be said as well that while this tradition about her following families that have O or Mac in their name, that's very common, as I said, but actually there are other families, whose names, even historically, didn't have O or Mac in them. So, it's not an absolute. There are also other families that she was believed to be associated with. So what you're saying is absolutely right. I mean, a huge proportion of Irish surnames, as we know them today, would have had O or Mac in them in their original Irish form, and then very, very often, down through the years, the O or the Mac might have fallen off or got left off. But no, I mean, certainly a very significant proportion of Irish names would have had that originally, so you're right.
Right. And in terms of the Banshee, in terms of reports about her, is she always seen, or can she just be heard?
She is more often heard than seen. But having said that, in most of the country, there are also accounts which have been recorded by, collectors of the Irish Folklore Commission, who did such amazing work throughout the 20th century, and indeed accounts that have been recorded into the 21st century as well. There are many accounts of her having been seen, as well as people who heard her. And there are often, most of these accounts would describe her, as we were saying a minute ago, a fairly old woman, and very, very often she's described as having long white hair. And in quite a number of accounts too, she's described as combing her hair. And this is something which is probably quite ancient too, the idea of women kind of pulling up their hair at times of grief and so on. But in any case, the story of the Banshee combing her hair, that actually gave rise to a story which you find in many parts of the country still, and that's the idea of somebody who finds a comb on the ground and brings it home with them, but it turns out to be the Banshee's comb, and the Banshee comes to the house that night and knocks on the window or on the door to get her comb back. But the person who has the comb is quite rightly a little bit wary and cautious as to how they should handle this. So they actually hand the comb out to the Banshee with the tongs, and she grabs the comb, but in grabbing the comb, she also completely, breaks the tongs or destroys it in some way. So, the moral of the story is that this is what would have happened to the unfortunate person if they had put their hand out to give her comb back. So again, there's a strong sense here, which you get in many other traditions relating to the other world in general, and certainly to the other world of the fairies. There's a strong sense that, you don't mess with the Banshee. You treat her with caution, and you treat her with respect, and, you treat her with, I suppose, a certain amount of fear as well, because she does represent a supernatural force. But yeah, in most of the country there are stories of the Banshee having been seen. In Cork and Kerry, for some reason, I think nobody knows exactly what, but it's much more common for her to be heard rather than seen. But of course, it's the distinctive wail of the Banshee that is the most characteristic feature, and this is something that has been described and written about quite a lot by all kinds of people. The wail, the crying of the Banshee in turn is probably related to the old Irish tradition of people, of women specifically, crying at funerals, the Irish cleaner, or keen, or lament. And there's probably a connection between the idea of the Banshee being heard to cry before a death in the area, and the idea of these crying women, these keening women at funerals and at wakes and so on as well. So that's kind of another connection. Of course, this is a very old tradition too. But it's really interesting as well, because, I've had experience of this even in the west of Ireland myself in recent. People who would be really quite sceptical and would be very dubious about believing in anything like the Banshee. Very often these are the kinds of people who say, I don't believe in any of that, but, this happened to me, and I did hear it. And it's very hard. I mean, I would certainly never, ever, I'd be very slow to dismiss anybody or what they said they had heard. But it's very interesting because sometimes it's people who are, would not normally be given to beliefs about the supernatural, shall we say. And sometimes these are the people who have these very, very interesting and very convincing accounts of having actually heard the Banshee themselves very often. And, it's a question mark there. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, your own experience is very hard for anyone else to disprove because you experienced it. Yeah. I found that a lot with talking to people that it's the same thing that you're saying there. It's, I don't know about this, but I heard, or that in my family there's this thing, and there's still that kind of give towards maybe the allowing themselves to kind of suspend their reality for a moment and delve into what they don't normally believe.
Yes, I was just going to say you do have experience in your own background and in your own interesting, very interesting. Well, the I was thinking of, the woman who was telling me that she was actually in the front room of the house, and I was out in the countryside as well, one night. She heard what she thought was a child crying outside. It was quite late at night, but she thought it might have been her niece, who had a couple of small children at the time and who would visit her very often. And she thought to herself, gosh, the very odd hour of the night for, her to be visiting. But she was, so convinced. She went back into kind of the back of the house where the kitchen was. And one of the other people who was in the kitchen, brother-in-law of hers, actually went out, in fact, to see if this niece was coming with her children, because she was so sure that she had heard somebody crying. And of course, there was no sign of anybody outside. But anyway, the upshot of that particular story is that the man living in the house next door died the following day. But again, it's she would be very typical of the kind of person who certainly would never be given to any kind of fanciful imaginings. And, that kind of thing is difficult to explain.
And that was a modern story, like that's within the last...
Well, it would be a kind of late 20th century, actually, when it happened. So, yeah, pretty recent.
Is there many modern accounts, or are people as willing to document modern accounts? Because I feel like, you can tell people that someone heard a banshee, in the 18th century or in the 1920s, and it kind of fits the traditional aspect of, oh yeah, people believed in that stuff at the time. But, in today's society, where you're less likely to believe and, give rise to a paranormal or folklore explanation, is there any modern accounts of it?
Well, I mean, yes, certainly there was an account of the Banshee, recorded certainly in the 21st century, in this century. And even from talking to students, I'm often very surprised at how many students will come back to me with accounts of the Banshee or stories they would have heard themselves. So, yeah, I mean, again, as we were saying, I think that, she does have kind of an incredible ability to survive and to persist, even in areas and among communities where you'd never expect to hear anything about it. And I think that maybe nowadays people are, starting to become perhaps a little more open again to ideas like the Banshee, because, there's so much out there that we just don't understand and that we don't know everything about. And I think that, maybe in the past people were more inclined to think of things like stories about the Banshee as being, old-fashioned rubbish that nobody would want to. Maybe there's kind of an increasing interest in material like that. Because, okay, I mean, I'm not suggesting that the Banshee actually existed, obviously, but maybe stories and traditions like the Banshee are a way of explaining things to ourselves about how we feel about death and how we handle death, and about the impact, as I mentioned earlier, that death obviously has on an emotional level on our lives. And maybe by examining stories like this, which are, obviously, the Banshee is a collective tradition, it's something that belongs to a community, to society, and maybe to folklorists, of course, I would argue this, but, I would say that maybe by studying things like belief in the Banshee, that we can learn more about ourselves and our own culture and our own behaviour and what makes us behave and react the way we do. So for that reason, I think that they have a very definite value in terms of cultural studies, I suppose, in the broad sense. But then, obviously I'm prejudiced because I do teach folklore anyway, so naturally I believe it has a value. But I do think that they can help us to learn about ourselves, and we can interpret them in ways that are helpful to our understanding of ourselves and our own reactions and our own emotions.
I think you're right. I think you're very much right. So she's associated with death and that ritual and that liminality that surrounds death.
Exactly.
Yeah. But is she associated with any particular location, for instance, like a fairy fort? Because, or can she appear anywhere?
Well, the only location she can appear, really anywhere, it would seem, Sarah. The only place that there is a certain recurring tradition about, in terms of the type of place she is that she is quite often associated with water, which is kind of interesting too, because this is actually reflective of the figure of the bow, or the goddess figure. She was known as the Morrigan as well in early Irish literature, who was also believed to be associated with water. And this brings us to the idea of the Banshee sometimes appearing as a washerwoman, funnily enough, that she's actually seen washing clothes or sometimes washing a shirt in a stream. But this is something that goes back now. I hope I have my facts right here, but I think it's evil in the early period, maybe gone back to the 8th century, who also, it falls into another 8th century text I'm thinking about here, that there were other supernatural women who were believed to be engaged in washing as well, but who also presaged death. They also foretold the death of a person in one of the early joys of early Irish literature. So this association of the Banshee with water, now it's by no means something you find in all accounts and all descriptions of the Banshee, but it is a significant number of them. And it does seem to have these very early roots going back to early literary sources as well. And it's another of the kind of factors, I suppose, that Patricia Lycett looked at in her book, for example, and which she used in order to make the argument that the Banshee, as we know today, is probably someone who has, as I mentioned earlier, very ancient roots in Irish history.
Wow. That's funny, because actually the connection then you're saying of the water applies to the story in my own family, where she appears at a water pump. So
At a water pump?
Yeah, the pump where you got the water.
That's right, Sarah. Very good. I'd actually forgotten that, isn't it?
Yeah, so that same connection, that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. The idea, I think, is that some of the early texts that she was believed to be seen washing the bloodied clothes of men who have been engaged in battle. So there would be association between this kind of Morrigan figure as the goddess of war. And I think the idea is that this figure, and she manifests another name for the Morrigan men, was the bow, which of course is still a common name for the Banshee in areas of South Leinster and indeed in Waterford as well. But the idea was that she was watching the clothes of the men who had been wounded in battle, and that she was washing the blood off the clothes. So I think it's kind of a sociably gruesome kind of an antecedent for this idea of the Banshee being associated with water. But you see, it's another of the kind of links or connections to the early literary sources that Patricia Lycett and indeed some other people as well have worked on. So yeah, again, it's what you might think was a minor, heavy in significance, in its historical import, I suppose.
Off the top of your head, just gonna throw it at you. She's a death omen essentially, and I think Irish folklore is full of those omens, whether they come in the form of an entity or whether they come in the form of something reoccurring, like the three knocks. Is there any other death omens that are associated or that are in Irish folklore that are maybe not as well known as the Banshee, but that still exist?
Yeah, well, the appearance of certain birds around the house would certainly be one of them, Sarah. And really the only one I can think of apart from that is, as you just said, the very, very common belief that if you're sitting comfortably in your kitchen or in your living room at night and you suddenly hear three knocks, I think it usually is, somewhere outside, that is not a good sign. But in any case, and there's certainly, gosh, I'm just trying to think now, what other death omens would there be? They probably, the Banshee, and the idea of certain birds appearing around the house or even in the house, and the idea of the three knocks. I think it would be true to say that those three omens would probably be the most common omens of death in Irish tradition. I think that would be a good summing up.
And I suppose the final question I'd like to ask is, there is a lot of fear that surrounds the Banshee, but is there any other creature in folklore that perhaps is as terror instilling as the Banshee?
Again, it's very hard to think of anybody who was, so very closely associated with death. I mean, the other world of the fairies, as you know yourself from your own studies, Sarah, the fairies were certainly treated with caution and respect, like the Banshee. On the other hand, the fairies, sometimes could be benign in their dealings with human beings, and they certainly wouldn't have been figures of figures that people feared, or figures like the Banshee was. And equally as characters like, the Kruka or the Leprechaun or whatever, they very often had a kind of a mischievous element attaching to them as well. Whereas God knows it's kind of hard to see that there was anything very mischievous about the Banshee. She was kind of fairly serious stuff, and fairly heavy in the message she brought. So, it's a very good question, but I suppose, the headless coachman, I suppose, would be another figure who was, I think, at times regarded as an omen of death as well. This would be this man driving normally a horse-drawn coach, but he has no head on him, and I think he was not regarded as being a good sign either. So I suppose he would have been regarded with a certain amount of dread and foreboding. But no, I mean, I think the Banshee probably is the dreaded, the feared figure par excellence in Irish folk tradition. I think you could probably say that. Oh, mind you, sorry, just having said that as well, in the vast majority of accounts about her, apart from the fact that somebody, very often in the family or in the neighbourhood, apart from the fact that somebody dies after she's heard or seen, apart from that, and as long as you leave her comb alone, it's not said that she actually inflicts any harm on anybody either. So I suppose, in fairness to the Banshee, we should say that about her as well, that she kind of comes after you, unless you are on the way out anyway, with all due respect. So, there is all of that too. But no, she's a pretty serious figure, I would say. There aren't very many funny stories about the Banshee.
No.
Banshee is not confined to Ireland, and that actually works in two ways. For a start, there are accounts of the Banshee have been heard in the case of I think there are accounts, I'm not 100% sure of this, I think there are accounts of that have been heard in the States, but there are certainly accounts, and I may be wrong in saying that, so maybe I shouldn't be saying that as a definite statement, but there certainly are accounts of the Banshee having been heard in Ireland for somebody who died when they were abroad. I think that's the way it went, I think.
Wow.
Firstly. And secondly, you also find a kind of a comparable washerwoman supernatural figure in the tradition of Gaelic Scotland. And of course, the culture of Gaelic Ireland and Gaelic Scotland was really pretty much the same for hundreds of years. But you do find her in Scottish tradition as well. But no, the way the overseas Banshee works, I think, is that it's normally for somebody who is actually living abroad, and the Banshee is heard here. I'm not sure. The more I think about it, I'm not sure that she's ever actually been heard abroad, but maybe she was. Maybe research would unearth more people hearing the Banshee if we did a proper wide-scale survey. In this age of globalisation, maybe the Banshee has managed to globalise it.
It would be interesting to find out if she's supposed to cry for the O'Neill family. If the O'Neill family did move to the Estates, does she follow them? Yeah, is she spiritual that way? Yeah.
Well, as I say, I'm just not sure now. Having said that, I actually can't remember if we have accounts that haven't been heard outside of Ireland, apart from Scotland. We're talking about the same culture there, the hundreds of years. But I'm not sure she's been heard outside of Ireland. But it really would not surprise me at all if there were cases of people having Banshee experiences in the case of Irish families who have gone abroad.
So, there you have it, international listeners. If any of you have perhaps heard of a Banshee travelling abroad, do let us know. Does she? Has she ever travelled outside of Ireland? If you're an Irish person living abroad, do you have any stories of the Banshee visiting you while abroad, about any family members back in Ireland or anything like that? Because if so, we want to know. Please do email us in your stories and experiences if you so wish. Do follow us on Instagram and Twitter and join our Facebook group. And thank you for listening. That was Barbara and Sarah chatting away. Thank you very much for your time and for being here. And this has been a pair of Banshees.